This is Sam Long.
I'm Ron Peters.
And I'm John Newton.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. I will wish you a happy Thanksgiving if you're listening to this around the time it is being released.
Yep.
If you're listening to this years later, I don't know what season it is, but for us it's Thanksgiving.
It is Thanksgiving week.
Gentlemen, what are you thankful for?
Ooh, what am I thankful for? You know, I guess right at this moment, I'm thankful for the fact that not only our doors are still open, but that we're on a good path moving forward. I'm very thankful for that because we had some times where it's like, all right, so what's our strategy if we were to close the doors? And so we had those conversations, and thankfully those conversations are in the rearview mirror, that we did not have to act on it. And so glad for the fact that we're still rolling here at GLCC, and with a really positive future. You know, things are looking very, 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 very good for us. So first thing that comes to my mind. Sorry, I had to go for the work thing there, but
Fair.
And I would, just to clarify, I wouldn't say we were that close.
we were having conversations.
Yeah, the fact that we were put on probation.
No, I'm going back way before that.
Oh, way before
No,
that.
I'm not talking about the probation
say,
thing. I'm going way back before that. So if you thought I was talking about probation, please forgive me. That's not what I was talking about. But years even before probation, where we were really concerned about our finances.
Yeah. The past few years, there's just positive momentum growing and growing, and we're expanding our online offerings, expanding into graduate studies, and offering new programs and strengthening programs. So yeah, I share that too. Now is a great time to be at Great Lakes.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We were put on probation when things were getting better.
Right.
It's like
right. Yeah.
they were looking
we were
at
in
us,
an upswing.
Yeah, and they were just looking at old data, and we're like, but we're looking at the current data, and it's actually better. And so it just took HLC a little while to catch up with where we were or where we are.
Yeah. Cool. My thankful thing, and my family does have a tradition of around Thanksgiving looking back on the previous 12 months, which doesn't quite line up with the calendar year or academic year, but the Thanksgiving year, as I like to call it. And for us, we just had a huge year as a family. I mean, our daughter Sierra had heart surgery and came through it magnificently, and all the while giving birth to our first grandchild. And then just so grateful for his presence in our life, Shepherd, and the health of Sierra. Her husband Christian got kind of the job of his dreams. Mm-hmm. Like, God has been so faithful in keeping His promises. So just really glad for what could have been a really rough year for my family had things gone differently, and we just don't want to take that for granted. Just super grateful. Lots of other things, but those things really rise to the top.
Amen. Agree.
Yeah, I can echo many of the things you said. The school, and for me, family has been interesting this year. My daughter, not unexpectedly, but kind of unexpectedly, decided to go to college her senior year instead of go to high school her senior year. And so having both of my kids here on campus and seeing them every day, and they seem to be thriving and a lot of good things happening in their lives. I'm just thankful for that because, you never know. I know lots of good Christian men and women whose kids just decide one day, like, I'm done with faith, I'm done with all this. And so I appreciate that hasn't happened yet and hopefully won't happen. But it's refreshing for me to see my kids, in the hall, hanging out with people, studying in a place where, God is the focus. And so it's been good for me. My wife, it's been more of a struggle, but because she doesn't see them every day like I do. And
right.
So, but I'd say that would be it.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, all three of us have had our kids come to Great Lakes, and their college experience strengthened their faith and did not shatter their faith.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Not that it wasn't challenged, but it
was.
It was challenged in a safe environment, which led to strength. Yeah, that's huge. So grateful.
I think we all go through ups and downs with our kids. You go through these times where things are going really well, and then you have those challenging moments. And I think the hard thing sometimes is to realize that challenging moments are normal. It's like, you just got to ride this out. But if you've laid a good foundation, then that's gonna hold them up. And to change the metaphor, if you've got good roots there, it's gonna bear fruit. And so we've been through challenging times with my daughter. She'll say the same thing. But her love for God has always come through, and I'm really grateful for that. And I know that her time here at Great Lakes played a role in that.
All right.
All right. So happy Thanksgiving again. Hope it's a good year
Happy
for you and yours.
Thanksgiving.
Well, we're going to continue our study of Micah. We might get through more than 7 verses today. We might not. We'll see how it goes. But we started last week talking about kind of the background to Micah, who he was, and the time period he was prophesying. And we ended, and we want to sort of bring that back to the first, like verses 2 to 7, that kind of set the stage for the rest of the book, because you got to keep this in mind as we go through about why is he talking, like why is he bringing this prophetic oracle, and the reason is because God's not happy because the people aren't living out Torah, they're not living out the things that they had committed to, and God is coming down. We see various transgressions, both politically and socially and religiously. And so because of that, God is going to bring judgment. And we talked about how it seemed to be aimed at Samaria to start with, but there is a hint of the southern kingdom as well, and that'll be fleshed out more as the book goes on. Either way, whether you're in the north or the south, God doesn't seem to be happy. And sort of the background is the rise of Assyrian power and the potential of bringing the consequences, the punishment of their sin as the history moves forward. That good enough?
Yeah, sounds good.
And that's important because of what we're going to start with, right? And we're in chapter 1, verse 8. And he says, "For this," and so the "for this" is the idols and the cult prostitution and the political centers, right? The lack of trust. For that, and then he's going to have to go forward. He's going to give his spiel. I'm going to turn it over to you to read a little bit, Ron, because John and I are going to be talking a lot about a few of these things.
Yep, you guys had a lot more to say about it.
We thought we might let you get in some reading at the very least.
Yep.
Would you read 8 through 16?
Can do. For this I will lament and wail. I will go barefoot and naked. I will make lamentation like the jackals and mourning like the ostriches. For her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah. It has reached the gate of my people to Jerusalem. Tell it not in Gath. Weep not at all. And, there's a word for you. And Beth Lepra, roll yourselves in the dust. Did I say that right?
We'll give it.
Close enough.
All right. Pass on your way, inhabitants of Shaphir, in nakedness and shame. The inhabitants of Zanan, do not come forth. Beth Ezel is waiting, and shall remove its support from you. For the inhabitants of Maroth wait anxiously for good, yet disaster has come down from the Lord to the gate of Jerusalem. Harness the steeds to the chariots, inhabitants of Lachish, for it was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for in you were found the transgressions of Israel. Therefore you shall give parting gifts to Moresheth Goth. The houses of Achzib shall be a deception to the kings of Israel. I will bring a conqueror upon you, inhabitants of Marashah. The glory of Israel shall come to Adullam. Make yourselves bald and cut off your hair for your pampered children. Make yourselves as bald as the eagle, for they have gone from you into exile.
As you read it, there's just so much. There's so much here. I think a lot of people probably, as they start reading this section and they get into these names, they start drifting off like we often do with unknown names. Yeah. And if you do that, you're going to miss out on some really great stuff.
Yeah. In English, this just does not sound like elegant poetry.
No.
I mean, it's one of the choppiest, most awkward oracles, I think, in the whole Old Testament.
Yeah. And as I tell my students all the time, translating poetry is hard because the things that poets use, you can't just swap languages with. And so, think about it. Think about your favorite song that has a rhyming and a rhythm pattern. Imagine if some other country decided, I love this song, but we're going to translate it into our language. It's just not going to be the same. As much as they're going to try, it's just not going to be the same. And that's what's happening here. And it's unfortunate because it's really, really good section here. And so it begins by saying, because of all the things, the prophet is going to lament and wail and go barefoot and naked. And that those are often associated with just lamenting about just being an outward sign that things are not right. There's wailing involved. The barefoot naked's not normal necessarily,
right? Yeah.
But we see other prophets apparently losing clothes as part of the job description.
Is it they're so overwhelmed by it that they're just not even paying attention to normal daily kinds of activities? I'd even put my shoes on or get dressed the way I'm supposed to because I'm just overwhelmed by the grief that I'm experiencing. Is it something to that effect?
I think it's possible. I wonder. I'd have to do the research on it, but I wonder if the naked actually implies the rending, the tearing of the garments, so
Okay,
that
yeah.
nakedness is showing through rather than full on walking around without clothes. I wonder if that's more of what it's talking about rather than the full on nakedness, but it could be.
Well, and I wonder if even like along the lines of what you're saying, Sam, like when he says naked, does it literally mean I have no clothes on, or it's like I have not put on, again, the normal clothes? Not that you're totally naked, but at the same time, you haven't got dressed the way you were supposed to. But I understand what you're saying. Just like rending the clothes could also be what he's talking about there.
And then verse 8, it talks about jackals and ostriches. I'm not a big fan of the translation ostrich. As you two
Yeah,
know, I'm
yes,
the
you-
fan of owl.
Yeah.
I think it makes a little bit more sense, mostly for the environment and where they're at. There's far more owls that are perhaps like screeching and like you hear an owl like ooh, like, and in the same way that if someone were wailing, right? That it's I think it's more the sound that he's talking about emulating, like a jackal or a screeching owl rather than an ostrich. I don't know what sound do ostriches make. I don't even know.
Yeah. And it's notoriously difficult for English speakers today to translate Hebrew when it's given a list of animals and
Oh,
birds.
yeah.
Like we don't have an ancient Near Eastern dictionary from the time this prophet was written, right? We
Yeah,
have
right.
modern dictionaries they see these words, they know they're referring to some kind of animal that apparently sounds like what you sound like when you howl. And
Yeah.
just by context of how the word is used, they do their best guess on what animal's being talked about. But you're right. Ostrich doesn't seem to make as much sense as owl.
Agreed. Glad we're on agreement there. And to your point, I would just say that yes, it's like you come across this word. It's like it's some sort of winged creature,
Right.
right? So let's go with ostrich, yeah, or whatever it might be. And it's tough to translate it. And then verse 9, this is where we get maybe perhaps a switch. For her wound is incurable; it has come to Judah. It has reached the gate of my people to Jerusalem. The implication is if he starts out talking about Samaria and all the things wrong with them, it's like it's infectious and it's bleeding over
Yes.
the border, and now it's coming and it's right at our doorstep.
Yeah. And this to me is part of the case of thinking that, the emphasis of the first oracle is Samaria, is the northern kingdom, and now it's spilling forth into the southern kingdom.
And
I see a movement.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a double. Both of the sin is bleeding over, but also Assyria could be bleeding,
yeah,
right?
yep.
Where in the same way that they're slowly moving and taking over the country, like hitting cities here and there. Anyway, that's the impression I get from that. And if this is happening in 701, if this oracle has to do with 701, they have literally reached the gate of Jerusalem. The Assyrian army has surrounded the city. But that could be more than it's being talked about.
Yeah.
Now for the
So
fun
I want
part.
to talk about the awkward poetry.
Yes. Awkward to us poetry. This is so great because what he does is he takes a bunch of cities that are in Judea or in the surrounding, maybe the Shephelah, the foothills, and he's going to take these cities and he's going to build a bunch of puns. Right, he's going to use the city and make a pun. A joke's not the right word. Use it to talk about the sort of destruction that's on the horizon, or the lamenting, the sadness that is part of it. Again, it just doesn't work great, right? Because even in Hebrew,
in English.
yes, in English, in Hebrew, even it's still there's like it's a stretch for some of them where a word sounds like another word, and so like Gath, you would have to figure out, well, what's a word that sounds like Gath in Hebrew, but also in this particular case, it means to tell or to reveal, right? And so like there's the Gath, which Gath, like there's closeness, and then when you have the actual form of the Hebrew word, that in sound kind of disappears. So it's like Yigat and Gath are like, oh yeah. So if you're saying this in Hebrew, like, oh, that sounds alike. And so if everyone knows what a pun is, it's a play on words. And he's going to do this verse after verse after verse. And he spent a lot of time coming up with okay, this word, what's another word that sounds like it? Aha! And then he builds off of that.
Are they, but you were kind of mentioned already, are they good puns or are they tortured puns?
Both. Well,
Okay.
tortured maybe.
I mean,
a
they're
bit
good
harsh.
enough.
Yeah. Like, I mean, for them, like, it's the same thing when you hear a word, when
Yeah.
a word's close enough, like, It's some maybe dad jokey, but not really. I mean, most are pretty good.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Hebrew word for goth sounds like the Hebrew word for tell, right? Beth Lephra sounds like house of dust or is house of dust. And then Philistia, Gath is a Philistine city, and the phrase roll yourselves sounds like the word for Philistia.
Yeah.
So that's going to be part of the play here. Za'anan sounds like she comes out. Beth Ezel, standing place. Maroth, bitter. Lachish sounds like the phrase to the steeds. Oxib sounds like the word for lie and deception. Marasheth sounds like possess, right? And so when you read all these town names and you see what is said about each of those towns, there are puns, just like Sam talked about. So we have a modern day attempt at capturing what's going on in Hebrew in English. And so there was an older one by a commentator named Moffat, but there's a newer one from Eugene Peterson. And you guys are probably familiar with The Message, which is a kind of paraphrase of the whole Bible, right? And so he's paraphrased verses 10 through 16. Do you want me to read
Go ahead.
Peterson's paraphrase? And this is an attempt to capture what's going on in the Hebrew, but in English. And again, it might sound more hokey in English than it does in Hebrew, but at least you're catching what's going on. So don't gossip about this in Telltown. Don't waste your tears. In Dustville, roll in the dust. In Alarm Town, the alarm is sounding. The citizens of Exitburg will never get out alive.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Lament, last stand city, there is nothing in you left standing. The villagers of Bitterton wait in vain for sweet peace. Harsh judgment has come from God and entered Peace City. All of you who live in Chariotville, get in your chariots for flight. You led the daughter of Zion into trusting not God but chariots. Similar sins in Israel also got their start in you. Go ahead and give your gifts to Goodbyeville. Mirage Town beckoned, but disappointed Israel's kings. Inheritance City has lost its inheritance. Glory Town has seen the last of its glory. Shave your heads in mourning over the loss of your precious towns. Go bald as a goose egg. They've gone into exile and are not coming back.
A lot of those sounds like dad jokes. But
Right.
I don't mean it in a negative way, because I think it does capture that idea of trying to align the name of a town with the judgment that you're sort of speaking against it. And it's like people can't see. I'm like smiling as I'm listening to it because, they're funny, but I like what he did there. I mean, it really does, I think, help the listener understand what it was that Micah was trying to do through here that just doesn't make it through in translation.
Okay, spontaneous idea.
I'm on it.
All right, here we go.
Come up with a modern day city, like an American city, and then turn it into a pun that would parallel one of these.
So, okay, this is not very. Okay, here we go. So this is not nice, which most of them usually aren't. And this is talking about Detroit from probably 20 to 30 years ago, not modern Detroit. So I guess he's someone saying like, "Oh, you live in Detroit? More like Petroit," right? Or something like right?
Yep,
something like that, where it's a play on it. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's close.
Yeah, I was thinking like there will be no more laughing in Lansing. It's a reach, I realize, but it's trying to capture that idea of something aligning with the word. It doesn't mean like I'm trying to think what Lansing means. It's just a
I have no
name.
idea.
I have no idea what the meaning is, so that's part of the problem.
Lansing has sung its last song.
That's not bad.
Okay, that's not too bad. Yeah, not
like-
too shabby.
Charlottesville has spun a web of deception.
Not bad. Flint is drinking his own water. Oh wait,
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
wow, yeah.
That would be a perfect example.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like you need to know something about the history
right.
to get why that's a pun.
Well, because I'm thinking about my hometown. I was born in Eaton Rapids. Eaton Rapids will run dry. The idea of the rapids going dry.
Yeah.
So,
I thought we were going to do a pun off of the eat. Well, Eaton Rapids will,
Actually, I grew
will
up with-
starve to death.
yeah. No, that's not too bad either.
Yeah. So you see how it works, and
Yeah.
some are better than others. But it's not that easy just to bring it into English. In fact, I tell this to my students, and they're like, "Well, why don't we have better translations?" Like, well, it's just not that easy.
Give it a try.
Yeah, yeah. And so, especially with these towns, like the fact most of the time he just like repeats the name.
Yeah,
Like Moffat was like, "Tell it not in Tellington." Well, that's not exactly what Gath means, right?
Right.
And so you get what he's trying to do, but that's
Yeah.
not exactly how it works. And so it is difficult. But when you read in the originals, like you hear, like you used, what was yours about Lansing?
No more laughing in Lansing.
Right. So you're using like alliteration and assonance, right?
Yep.
Which is a lot of what these are as well. They
Yep.
sound similar, and that's he's going off the sound to create the poetry. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I think it's great. It's funny and enjoyable and artistic, right? It's intelligence. Like so, it's not just thrown together, right? There's clearly some thought out aspects to it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that as he's writing these oracles, it's not like, sometimes people just think that God inspires someone to write and you just end up being a scribe. And it's very mechanical. God just says, write something, you write it out. Like you're listening and writing out what God says. But I suspect that he is thinking it through. Like, this is Micah really thinking these things through. And it's like, what's the best way to do this? And it's a very thoughtful process. And yes, it's inspired. It is God-breathed. I'm not trying to remove God from the process. What I'm trying to do is give Micah his due as he's trying to write out these oracles and be really clever, which means it probably was a thoughtful process. And who knows, maybe he came up with ideas and he's like, that's no good. He scribbles it out and comes up with something else
Right.
like, oh, that's a horrible one. That's a total dad joke. I'm not going to go with that one. And so maybe there were certain, early versions that he just rejected it until he came up with something that he was satisfied with.
Yeah, and I think when you're teaching this, I wouldn't hesitate for a high school group or even an adult group teaching Micah to give them time to write their own parallel.
Yeah.
What would a modern day parallel in the state you live sound like, given the names of the cities in your state? Or even if you want to do one about the country, plays off of the name of the different states in the country. And I think it does help people appreciate the Bible's prophets wrote in poetry. And there's a lot of artistic work happening that we lose. And this is why we encourage people, get a study Bible, so you can read the note. When you've read a poem and it kind of sounds awkward in English, it's like, man, I don't get what's going on here. It doesn't feel like good poetry. Read your notes. It's all good stuff, right? All of these authors are really wise people. They're at the top, echelons of their society in their ability to read and write. Like, they're not just wasting their ink.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Right? All of it is solid material. And if you don't get it in English, either you're missing something from the historical context or you're missing something in translation. And your notes, either way, should help you if you have a good study Bible.
Yeah. I'm thinking about some other towns. Like,
Of course you are.
we're gonna clean up Bath. The town of Bath. We're gonna clean up Bath. Don't get trapped in Weberville.
There you
The
go.
web, It's like, this is turning out to be kind of fun.
Yeah. Oh, an adult class would eat this up.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, people would get sucked into how clever they are, and it would be fun as a class. And then it's like, all right, we're having fun with the prophets. Let's go.
I know,
Just
right?
like that. They're okay.
Suddenly the prophets are fun.
I will say, when I do guest preaching, I like to preach on the minor prophets because most people don't read them and they leave like, wow. It's like, I didn't know that was in the Bible. Like, yeah, I know.
Most people
Yeah,
don't.
you and most everybody else.
But we don't want to miss the point in the midst of the frivolity or the revelry. These are all about lamenting, right? He's telling them to do things. The actions have to do with lament, like rolling in dust. The idea of looking at all these cities and they're ashamed, there is desolation. All sorts of things are happening because of the sin that is bleeding into the country. And I'll say this, the very first one, tell it not in Gath, has an allusion to David when Saul dies. That's the very first line of his sort of lament poem over over Saul. He says, tell it not in Gath, because he died by the hand of the Philistines. And Gath is one of the 5 main Philistine cities. And so it's like this callback to that in the same way that, like, we don't get excited because our king's dead. Now he's saying, like if you think things are great, they're not. And that sort of sets the stage for what is to come. Another note that I think is interesting is the Lachish one is it kind of has to do with harnessing a team, like with a chariot or something. But I think what he's talking about is not like harness for battle, but harness to flee. Right? Get them, get your war chariots ready, but not to put up a fight, but to get out of town because things are going to go sideways quickly. Another little one, the Moresheth thing. It says our translation is "Thank you, therefore you shall give parting gifts." It actually has to do with betrothal gifts, like when you get married, there are gifts involved, and you almost imagine like when someone gets married, there's the gift table, right? And so like the bride and groom are leaving, they're loading up the gifts in the car, and they're going off to their honeymoon. But this is you not going off to your honeymoon. This is you going to exile. Right,
Wow.
Yep.
and so like load up your stuff because it's all going away.
And so the parents would give parting gifts to the daughter who's leaving to go move in with their husband
Right.
in some other town.
Yes, in the same way, like you're gonna be gone, you're leaving too,
But not for a happy marriage.
not correct. That's a
You're not going on your honeymoon.
It's a send off into exile.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are just lots of really just interesting things like that, and all of it is reinforcing the fact that things are going to get bad very soon.
There's bad news for all these cities. And because of Assyria, right? I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
Assyria is God's instrument of humbling all of these cities once proud.
Yeah, and like Lachish especially was so just so people understand, most cities in the ancient world were not fortified, not in the way we think of. Because when we think of cities, we think of like the medieval ages and these castles with these huge stone walls and so forth. That's not how most cities were, if any.
Yeah, Jericho would be the exception.
Correct. And so, they would build walls, but they would be not as hard to overcome as we might think if they had walls. Those are the ones with stones. Many are just like maybe a brush.
Hedge.
Really, is what they were. And so Jerusalem and Lachish were two of the more fortified cities in Judea. And here, like even Lachish, where you might look to as maybe as a military stronghold, don't. And that's exactly what happens because Lachish goes down first, and eventually Jerusalem. And it all culminates with the last verse, verse 16. Make yourselves bald and cut off your hair for your pampered children. Make yourselves bald as the eagle, for they've gone from you into exile. And cutting off hair is another sign of lament, in the same way that rolling around in dust and tearing clothes. And so we have a couple of these actions that are that come up here, and that's what they need to just prepare themselves. It's going to be bad, and there's nothing that's going to stop that.
Yeah, and I love the image of pampered children. You've pampered your children because this is the time of relative peace. They've left this second golden age of prosperity in the land, and they didn't use it to give glory to God and forge their identity according to Torah. So they pamper their children, and now those children are going off into exile. And the children are going off into exile because, kings like to remove from the land the strength of the land. Whether to repurpose them in other lands or to just make this land weaker. The parents are left behind because their best days are behind them. You stay, but I'm taking your kids. And so it humbles the land and it removes the strength from the land, removes the future from the land.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, it's just a really grim picture. And Mike is saying that things are going to get really bad when God shows up and judges. And we as the reader know it's going to be the form of a nation, but the implication is from God because of their sins. All right. Shall we move on? I guess we have time.
We do have time. Yes, we do.
I don't know, John. What do you think? You want to do 2, 1 through 11, or 2, 1 through 5?
Yeah, let's start with 1 through 5.
All right. I think you're up to read.
I just did that paraphrase. I think you're up.
That's fair enough. I'll accept that. Woe to those who devise wickedness and evil deeds on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it is in their power. They covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. They oppress householder and house, people in their inheritance. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, now I am devising against this family an evil from which you cannot remove your necks, and you shall not walk arrogantly, for it will be an evil time. On that day, They shall take up a taunt song against you and wail with bitter lamentation and say, we are utterly ruined. Yahweh alters the inheritance of my people, how he removes it from me. Among our captors he parcels out our fields. Therefore, you will have no one in Yahweh's assembly to allot you a piece of land.
It's funny. That makes me think of how this is a major. It's the opposite of what they're sort of promised when God says, "If you're faithful to me, I will defeat your enemies. You will inhabit the land. You'll have bountiful times of crops." And so here he's saying, "Because you have not honored me," and I think it's very specific. This idea of coveting other people's houses and their fields and taking them, kind of like the social injustice, economic injustice that's taking place here, where the powerful are using their powerful against those who are not as powerful. God says, the very thing I promised you, I am now going to take away. And do not be so arrogant as to think, oh, no, God gave us this land, it's ours, and we're going to hate here because he's just going to take care of us. God is saying very specifically to them, no, I am going to make sure that you lose the very thing I gave to you. And don't think it's because, I don't care. It's all your fault. You made your decisions, and now you're going to have to live with those decisions.
Yeah, I think this chapter gets into the specific critique of the Israelites themselves. And it is interesting what's on the list. I mean, these ideas that you devise while you're lying in bed, like ways to make money, ways to defraud, ways to get rich, ways to bring down your enemy, expand your, what are the kind of things people devise, like things for their own good and prosperity.
Yeah, and it's almost like they can't sleep because they're consumed with wickedness and plotting the next thing.
Yeah, and that thing is spelled out in verse 2. They covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. They oppress householder and house. So it's kind of like, and who are the people who they're taking it away from? The poor.
Right.
Right. The people you can get away with stealing their stuff. So they're not stealing it from the king's men. They're not stealing it from the wealthy neighbor. It's those who have a chance of getting ahead at the expense of someone else. It's the vulnerable who are the targets. And so in this oracle, there's nothing about, woe to you because you worship false gods.
Right.
This is not a particularly cultic religious offense. It is a social economic offense, which is what the 8th century prophets are famous for. Yeah. Calling out the social injustices among God's people.
Yeah, and the injustices are very specific to Israel because they revolve around amassing property. And, of course, as we know, we talked about it various times, each Israelite family was given a plot of land as a gift from God in perpetuity, right? This was theirs. And, in fact, there are specific laws that allow it to be returned to them if for some reason they lose it. And so here there are people who are they're all about just building an empire, building more and more, having more and more at the expense of their brother, sister, cousin, third cousin, twice removed, whatever. They just don't care. And you're not supposed to sell the land. You're not supposed to covet someone else's land. You're just supposed to be content with what God has given you. And they refuse to do that. And it's very reminiscent of the story of Nadab and Nadab's vineyard and King Ahab and all things that went on with that, where he basically set up Nadab to be falsely convicted of a crime so that he could take, and he didn't, his wife Jezebel did it, so he could take his vineyard because he liked it and it was near the palace. Right? And so these sorts of things, just over and over, the prophets have no patience for that. And I don't think God does either.
Yeah. And why I think this is, 1 through 5 is a contained oracle. It begins with the offense of dreaming of taking other people's land. And by time it's like God's going to come and judge you. And verse 5 ends with, therefore you will have no one in the Lord's assembly to allot you a piece of land.
Yeah.
It's like God is going to rip you from the land. You who are ripping land out of the hands of others. And then 6 through 11, which we'll turn to now, unless you had something to develop.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's like the land's going to be given to a nation that does not worship Yahweh and someone who doesn't deserve an inheritance in this land. And now they're going to be in charge of it. And so the tables are going to be turned on these people who were just being selfish.
Yeah, good. And so, kind of what I want to bring out is this ring device or envelope structure where an oracle will begin with a keyword and it will end with a keyword or image, right? It's not always a word. And we see the same thing from 6 through 11. Do not preach, thus they preach. So it's beginning by talking about preaching, and it's going to end in verse 11 with people emptying falsehoods saying, I will preach to you of this. So it kind of starts with preaching, ends with preaching. So we have this beginning where you ended, which is one of the ways you kind of work your way through the prophets to understand where does this passage really begin. Look for key words that start at the beginning and end of a poem. That's an Israelite way of starting and ending something in a kind of, they call it a ring device or an envelope structure.
Yeah, and it shows you in that word structure. It's how we identify the structural elements so that we can break it down into smaller parts and understand those parts in their own sense, but then you can expand it out to see how they're part of a larger message as well.
Yeah, so you're a preacher or teacher, you would preach a sermon on either 1 through 5 or 6 through 11. Or if it's a 3-point sermon, maybe 6 through 11 is point 3 and 1 through 5 is point 2 and the previous one is point 1. Like it
Right.
helps you organize things. And so one of the things I used to make all my prophet students do is slowly work through each of the books and come up with your own outline. Try to identify the beginning and ending points of each oracle. And sometimes a good modern Bible will help you out.
Yep.
But like as we can look at, like in our Bibles, 2 through 11 is there as one big oracle, right? But there is kind of a space in between 1 through 5 and 6 through 11. So you can see it's kind of a double oracle or a 2-part oracle. You want to read 6 through 11, Ron?
Happy to do so. Do not preach, thus they preach. One should not preach of such things. Disgrace will not overtake us. Should this be said, O house of Jacob? Is the Lord's patience exhausted? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to one who walks uprightly? But you rise up against my people as an enemy. You strip the robes from the peaceful, from those who pass by trustingly with no thought of war. The women of my people you drive out from their pleasant homes. From their young children you take away my glory forever. Arise and go, for this is no place to rest, because of the uncleanness that destroys with a violent destruction. If someone were to go about uttering empty falsehoods, saying, I will preach to you of wine and strong drink, such a one would be the preacher for this people.
I just love that literary device.
Yeah.
It's just very pleasant. You start on, they say don't preach. Well, this is the kind of preacher they want,
Yeah.
the beer
Exactly.
preacher.
Yeah, it is great. Like they say don't preach, and this is what we talked about last time with Micah, where he didn't give them a message they were really happy with, the king or anyone in power. And so he comes, and they say, don't preach that. Don't tell us that disgrace is going to overtake us. Like, we have Jerusalem. We have the temple. What are you talking about? You're full of it, man. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And so they're trying to quell his voice, and because they don't like what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about different injustice in this section, right? And this is having to do with, it's like the women of my people, right? So it's almost like they're these brutally attacking unsuspecting travelers and robbing of their clothing, somehow abusing women, leaving children to be orphans, perhaps. And so we know that like children. So if they're children of women who are widows, that's already difficult enough. And if then the women get killed as well, right? They're going to be deeply impacted by the loss. They may have been even forced to sell themselves as slaves, maybe slaves in a foreign land. And they're doing that to each other, right? Where they should be taking care of their countryman or woman, they're abusing them and attacking them, and it's just awful treatment of one another.
Now, do you think this is an oracle specifically about the northern kingdom? Because should this be said, O house of Jacob? So there's nothing in this section about Jerusalem
Right.
or Judah, the southern kingdom.
Yeah, it's true. Well, this goes back to it depends whether it's being appropriated or not. I mean, it likely was to the northern kingdom, but I have the impression that it could easily apply to the southern kingdom as well.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like though that oftentimes the northern kingdom was looked down upon, but the southern kingdom was not different. They just happened to have the temple.
Yeah. I think it's helpful just to notice, in this poem, it's the northern kingdom that's being named by name.
Mm-hmm.
which it doesn't mean it doesn't apply to Southern Kingdom.
Right.
It just means we are talking about them. And that's a weird dynamic in the prophecy, right? A Southerner is talking about the North, and that has its own kind of dynamics. But you're right. This is not about just devising. This isn't all about land and stealing people's land. This is about how you're treating particularly vulnerable people. Now, again, it's probably the vulnerable people whose land is being stolen,
Right.
and maybe it's widows who are being targeted. They are easy prey because if they're a widow, it's just them and their children. They've got targets on their back,
Right.
and they're easy prey. Which is why when Ruth is in the land of Boaz, right? Like Boaz says, "Hey, glean after my women. I'll make sure you're safe." And he has to tell his men, right? And this is in a Judean town. Like he has to tell his men, "Hey, don't touch that one. Leave that widow alone." It's because wicked men will see in her an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
predators go for the weak and the sick, and so they would see her as weak, and it's like, all right, here's an easy target. Let's go after her. Yeah.
And God wants to say, these easy targets are my people.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you have to stop thinking of them as opportunities for you to advance your standing in society. You have to see them as dearly beloved people of God.
Yeah, and so as a result, verse 10 is kind of fascinating. It says, "Arise and go, for this is no place to rest, because of uncleanness that destroys, the violent destruction." And if you build upon these two sections so you're going to take a bunch of land and you're going to rob a bunch of people and take advantage of them, you think you're going to amass wealth and security for yourself. Guess what? It's not a place of rest. It's not a place of peace. There is destruction that's on the horizon. And so that's why, and so he says, so despite you wanting me to preach one thing, this is what you're doing. It's not a place of peace. And then he wraps it up saying, meanwhile, you're saying, hey, let's just enjoy our stuff, right?
Mhm.
Wine and strong drink, right? That's what we want to hear, right? We want we want to have a preacher who makes us feel good about ourselves and doesn't step on our toes. And that's not going to be Micah.
Yeah. And it's just a powerful oracle. Like how many people want of their preachers today to preach a good feel-good message? Don't be getting preachy on us and pointing out things you don't like that we're doing. Preach us uplifting things. Preach us prosperity. And I think that's what this wine and strong drink. It's a prosperity gospel. That's the kind of preacher they want. These are celebratory beverages, and they want people to preach them good times, and they don't want preachers to give the truth.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. It's not just about prosperity. It's just about. It's funny when someone brings up something that's offensive, then we start calling it something that it's not. Like, why are you getting so political, or why are you getting so this, or no, I'm just preaching the Bible, and we turn it
Right.
into
Yeah,
something that
right.
is not because we're offended, and that's obviously not the point of the preacher. They're trying to convict us when we're wrong, where we're mistaken.
Yeah. And we encounter this in the classroom. Like we'll be teaching, just doing application, working through the passages, saying how this would have impacted, the audience. And every once in a while, there'll be a student kind of raises their hand. I don't think you should be talking so negatively about this group of people because, they're, they love the Lord and they're trying to do good. You know what I'm saying? They'll rise up and actually, I wasn't targeting whoever you think I was targeting. I'm just giving hypotheticals of what this could mean in our context. The fact that you're taking this personally, the fact that you have someone in mind that this applies to, and you assume I'm talking about them, might be interesting thing that the Holy Spirit's got going on there.
Yeah, exactly. Without a doubt.
But no one likes to hear, throwing shade on them or their loved ones or their
Right.
leaders or those who have, that they have respect for.
Yeah.
Well, there's two verses left in this first oracle. Remember, we talked about the book being divided into 3 oracles.
Yep.
And so this oracle, or cluster of oracles really, began in chapter 1, verse 2, and ended in chapter 2, verse 11. And now, the kind of wrapping it up is chapter 2, verses 12 to 13. And this seems to be the end of the first batch
Yep.
of oracles before you get to the second one. Whose turn to read?
I think yours, but I will read it if you don't want.
I'll read. That's
Go for
fine. So chapter 2, verses 12 to 13. And it just sounds like such a different tone. I will surely gather all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the survivors of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture. It will resound with people. The one who breaks out will go up before them. They will break through and pass the gate past the gate, going out by it. I have to turn the page. Their king will pass on before them, the Lord at their head.
So this is a nice oracle of restoration and bringing you back together, because he just got through saying it's going to get bad, right? That, starting with in chapter 1, God's going to come and melt everything. And then here, like, arise, go. There's no place of rest. There's destruction on the horizon. And so there's this seemingly a need to kind of like, however, after all that, there is going to be some restoration. And we see this often with the prophets, where they really lay it on thick, and they say, however, that's not the end of the story. Yeah. And they don't say it's not going to happen.
Right, yeah.
They just say there's act 2,
Yep.
which is restoration and bringing people back.
Yeah. Yeah, and that idea of restoration always seems to be a part of the story, that God isn't finished with you. If he has to discipline you, if he's got to teach you a lesson, that's part of the process. But don't see it as God just causing you to live in that in perpetuity. But God says, once you get through that, there's still a positive. I'm going to come back for you. I haven't forgot about you. I haven't stopped loving you. That positive ending, I think, is a part that so many people miss. They get so caught up in the hard part, which is legitimately hard, that they just don't hear that last little bit where God says, but I've got a good plan at the end of the story. It's a happy ending story.
Yeah. And I think it's doubly key to recognize, who he's talking about. I will gather you, O Jacob, survivors of Israel.
Right.
And he talks about the king will pass on, the Lord at their head. So the Lord will be their king.
Ideally.
Their kings got them in trouble. Their kings brought upon judgment. There will come a day when God gathers the survivors. And this is a remnant theology. Like, there's going to be Israelites who are scattered, but God hasn't utterly forsaken them. There's a time when he wants to gather them, and he will one day again be their king. And that's one of the hopes that comes out of multiple prophets throughout the Old Testament, that this northern kingdom, which is being scattered from the Assyrians, which is different from the southern kingdom that will be scattered by the Babylonians, that the prophets anticipate a day where the scattered northerners will be gathered. And that's part of the hope that Jesus comes to fulfill. And so it's interesting, when Jesus comes to gather the lost sheep of Israel, he spends almost all of his time in the northern kingdom.
Yeah.
Right? He's in northern kingdom territory. And I just read a fascinating book. It's the one I had you ordered. You have it on the desk over there?
I don't think I
Paul,
haven't ordered it yet.
Paul and the something. Oh,
Yeah, I still haven't ordered it yet.
okay. But anyway, one of the main theses of the book is that, in Paul's theology of all of Israel being restored in Romans 11, and there's a lot of debate about what that's talking about. And he makes, I think, Paul and the Resurrection of Israel.
Okay, yeah.
That's the name of the book. He's talking about the incoming of the Gentiles is, as the Gentiles are brought in, so come in the scattered Israel. Like, so all of Israel being saved in the mission to the Gentiles and the incorporating them into the people of God is how God is going about keeping his promises through the prophet of Micah and others, that he's not done with northern scattered Israel. And as they're scattered in exile, they lose their identity among the nations. But as the nations are brought into the kingdom of God, so is scattered Israel. And so at the end of the day, all of Israel is restored, not just the remnants of Judah from the south, but also the remnants of the scattered northerners. And so yeah, I think this is just a hope. It's easy to pass on and think, well, this is just a situational thing in the 8th century. No, this is part of why Jesus came. It's part of the salvation that Paul is talking about in Romans, the entire book of Romans, but especially in 9 through 11.
Gotcha.
All right.
All right. Well, once again, we've reached the end of our time. Went a little bit over, but that's okay. Good conversation and a lot more to talk about in Micah. I'm looking forward to it. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of the After Class podcast. After Class, because
The best conversations happen
After class.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the After Class Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio production is provided by Drew Nyquist. Social media is managed by Darren Harris.